Good Tuesday, everyone. Day 81 of the war between Hamas and Israel. I'm Jim Williams. This is the Politically Incorrect Podcast. Today, we have two headlines, and they will be the focus of the analysis today. First is a article that was penned by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in yesterday's edition of the Wall Street Journal. It has brought a tremendous amount of angst as well as protest by the hostage families, and we'll get into why. Also, President Joe Biden has authorized an attack on some of the proxies who are involved by and funded by Iran for their injuring United States military people in the region. So things are kind of ratcheting up a little bit, and we're going to take you through what those mean, give you an analysis, and have an opportunity to hopefully get your comments on it as well. All right, but first we're going to go to today's press briefing with Eylon Levy, the spokesperson for the Israeli government. So without further ado, here's Eylon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy. This is day 81 of the October 7th war. IDF fatalities since the start of the October 7 massacre stand at 492. In the past 24 hours, we have mourned the deaths of 25-year-old Sergeant First Class Joseph Gittarz, 24-year-old Staff Sergeant Elisha Yonatan Loba, and 21-year-old Staff Sergeant Daniel Nahmani. May their memories be a blessing, and our thoughts are, of course, with their families. Since October 7th, over 13,000 rockets have been launched towards sovereign Israel, deliberately targeting our civilians and sending millions running for the bomb shelters. Of those rockets, 2,000 have crash-landed inside the Gaza Strip, causing untold damage to civilians and infrastructure there. An update on the October 7th hostage crisis. Hamas still holds 129 people hostage in its terror dungeons since 10/7, 22 of whom have since been murdered in captivity, with Hamas holding their bodies hostage. We repeat our demand for the immediate and unconditional release of the vulnerable hostages still trapped in the Hamas terror dungeons. Time is running out for them. We are continuing to apply the same military pressure that forced Hamas into the first hostage release pause, and the Prime Minister has communicated with the leaders of all the great powers to demand their intervention to secure the hostages' release. As the Prime Minister told the Knesset yesterday after visiting troops in northern Gaza, we will shake every tree and turn over every rock to bring our hostages home. We are committed to the pledge that there will be no one left behind. That is a central goal of this war. Israel remains committed to fighting this war until the end to create a new reality in the wake of the 10/7 massacre that will benefit Israelis and Palestinians alike. Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu spelled out the 3D vision for peace between Israel and our neighbors in Gaza: the destruction of Hamas, the demilitarization of Gaza, and the de-radicalization of Palestinian society. Those are the three prerequisites for peace. First, as Hamas threatens more October 7th massacres, anything short of the dismantling of its military capabilities and the end of its political rule is a guarantee of further bloodshed. Second, we will have to ensure that Gaza is never again turned into a base of attacks against our people. That will require Israeli overriding security responsibility over Gaza for the foreseeable future, a temporary security zone on the perimeter of Gaza, and an inspection mechanism on the Gaza-Egypt border that prevents weapon smuggling. Third, and most importantly for enduring peace, Palestinian civil society must be transformed so that its people support fighting terrorism rather than funding it. Unfortunately, polls show that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and West Bank alike still support the October 7th atrocities despite everything. That must change. We need to see courageous and moral leaders on the other side, able to condemn barbaric violence instead of denying it and giving Hamas political cover, as Palestinian Authority leaders have been doing. History shows that de-radicalization can transform even the most extreme societies into prosperous democracies and Western allies, and the same can and must happen here. For too long, failed foreign policy orthodoxies have kept this conflict on life support, trapping us in a cycle of violence. We urge the international community to help us secure these three conditions for peace after Israel's total victory over Hamas, in order to turn a new leaf in Gaza and offer hope to this region. An update on the deeply problematic involvement of the United Nations in this conflict. For too long, international officials have been deflecting blame onto Israel to cover up for the fact that they are covering up for Hamas. In failing to condemn Hamas for hijacking aid and failing to condemn it for waging war out of hospitals, they have been complicit partners in Hamas's human shield strategy. They have let the world down. We are demanding global accountability, and now we are leading by example. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has announced that visa requests by UN employees will no longer be granted automatically and will instead be considered on a case-by-case basis. Israel will stop working with those who cooperate with the Hamas terror regime's propaganda machine, and we urge our allies to do the same and stand up for basic integrity in the global institutions that should serve and not sabotage international security. An update from the Northern Front. In the face of continued Hezbollah aggression, we are issuing a firm warning to the Iranian proxy on our northern border. Back off or be pushed away. The time is now for the international community to act for the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, pushing Hezbollah's terror army away from our northern border. Every day that Hezbollah exists on our border in violation of international law is October 6th, posing an immediate threat of a much larger October 7th on the border with Lebanon. The state of Israel will not accept the continued displacement of 80,000 Israelis and the ongoing shelling of their homes. And the anti-tank missile attack just recently on the St. Mary's Greek Orthodox Church in Ikrit, injuring a civilian in Israel, is a reminder that for Hezbollah and its Iranian puppet masters, nothing is sacred. There is no going back. Either Hezbollah retreats as part of an effective diplomatic solution, our preferred option, or we will push it back ourselves using military force. Israel does not want a war on two fronts, but we will do whatever is necessary to return our people safely to their homes. That's the end of today's update. As always, we'll take your questions now. If you'd like to type your questions in the chat, and of course, please write down your names and media affiliations.
Question comes from Dan Williams from... The first question comes from Dan Williams from Reuters. 1. When will the humanitarian corridor between Cyprus and Gaza be active? 2. Which countries or shipping companies will transport the aid to Gaza? How and where will it be landed on the Gaza coast? And 3. Israel has kept Gaza under naval blockade since 2007 and is legally required to exclude any and all ships from Gaza waters. How then can aid ships be admitted as part of this corridor?
Mr. Williams, thank you for your question. I can say this. We are examining additional avenues for the international community to support civilian needs in Gaza, not through the Israeli crossings. It is, of course, a fiendishly difficult task to get aid into enemy-controlled territory when the enemy hijacks that aid, when UN agencies do not condemn it for doing so. And when we have updates, we will announce them. Now, for context, when Hamas declared war on October 7th, the Security Cabinet decided to close those crossings that Hamas destroyed as part of the massacre. Now, as part of the agreement with the Americans, we have temporarily reopened Kerem Shalom for deliveries of humanitarian necessities on the understanding that the United States will fund an upgrade of Egypt's Rafah crossing so that provisions will no longer have to go through our border. Our role is to screen humanitarian aid trucks for Hamas weapons smuggling attempts, and there is still excess screening capacity at Nitzana and Kerem Shalom. If the United Nations wants more aid to get in, it should send more aid. There are no restrictions on our side, but as and when we have updates on the modalities of how more aid will be able to get in, we will of course announce them.
From Jonathan Rice of the New York Times. How does Israel view the Egyptian peace proposal, which, it has been reported, includes Hamas in a transitional Gaza government?
The Israeli government remains committed to the goals of this war, which are to destroy Hamas's military and governing machine inside the Gaza Strip and the return of the hostages. We understand, and our allies understand, that this war must end with the end of Hamas. Hamas will no longer govern the Gaza Strip in a way that has allowed it to launch tens of thousands of rockets against our cities and to launch the October 7th massacre. Now, of course, I can't comment on any other specific details about specific negotiations, other than to say it's been obvious from day one that Hamas is prioritizing its grip on power over the lives of the entire civilian population in the Gaza Strip. This war can end immediately if Hamas surrenders, turns over its war criminals, lays down its arms, and immediately releases the hostages. And we think that should be the basic demand from all elements of the international community concerned with ending this war in a way that ensures that Hamas can never attack us again, to demand the unconditional surrender of the army of terror that launched the October 7th massacre.
David Isaac of JNS. Initially, Israel said it would cut off aid if it turned out it was diverted to Hamas. It clearly does. The US at the start also said aid would stop. Instead, the US calls for still more aid. Is there any discussion of returning to the original formula of cutting aid off, since Israel has no obligation to resupply its enemies?
First of all, Israel has no interest in seeing a humanitarian crisis or any sort of humanitarian suffering inside the Gaza Strip. Now that aid is not being delivered effectively because of Hamas's war, we're seeing all those aid agencies reminding the world of actually how much was going in through the Israeli crossings the day before the war and the day before Hamas decided to attack those crossings. We are demanding that the United Nations and other international agencies condemn Hamas for hijacking aid. We note, for example, that UNRWA, which has proven itself an ineffective mechanism for distributing aid, on 16th of October, I think it was, put out a tweet stating that Hamas had stolen supplies, including fuel, from its stockpiles, and then deleted that tweet, covering up for Hamas and denying reports on social media which are in fact its own tweets. We want to see the international community calling Hamas to account for hijacking aid. And as we said, we will no longer accept international officials deflecting blame onto Israel and accusing it of all sorts of monstrosities in order to cover up the fact that they are covering up for Hamas. We don't want to see any humanitarian suffering in the Gaza Strip, and it is important that aid reach the civilians who need it and that Hamas not steal it. And we have to start with international accountability on that.
The next question from Joel Park of Breitbart News. There are still rockets being fired at cities in the south. When does Israel anticipate being able to shut down rocket attacks from Gaza completely?
Mr. Pollock, we're not going to give specific deadlines for when we're going to be able to block off rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, but that is a central aim of this war. We will no longer allow the Gaza Strip to be used as one large rocket launch pad against Israeli cities. Now, already we have announced that we have captured and destroyed 30,000 explosives inside the Gaza Strip, including rocket launchers on trucks, including rockets that were ready to be fired at Israeli cities. And we're going to continue with that effort as we move through the Gaza Strip and dismantle the Hamas terror state. This is going to take time. Hamas has spent 16 years deliberately embedding itself in civilian areas, and we've exposed the evidence of those rocket launchers embedded within mosques and scout centers and other civilian infrastructure. And that is the central goal of this war, to dismantle the Hamas terror state and make sure that no security threat against the Israeli people will ever emanate from the Gaza Strip ever again.
One final question from Anna Julian of the Jewish Press. The US is, quote, preparing the Palestinian Authority for a role in Gaza on the day after the war. What is the government's response to this?
The government has been clear. We will not tolerate the introduction of any element into the Gaza Strip that funds as opposed to fighting terrorism. We have seen the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh calling Hamas an integral part of the Palestinian mosaic. Now, that is not a signal from someone who is serious about fighting terrorism. That is a signal from an authority that is making excuses for terrorism, covering up for terrorism, and giving it political cover. We think that whoever governs the Gaza Strip the day after Hamas must be committed to fighting terrorism, repudiating its violent ideology, instead of giving it political cover. And the Palestinian Authority at the moment is not a partner for that reconstruction effort. And it's worth remembering that the last time Israel gave the Gaza Strip on a silver platter to the Palestinian Authority, it ended up getting toppled from power and Hamas took over. And we will not be repeating the same mistakes again. We're good students of history. Okay, and that's all for today. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll update you about the timing of tomorrow's press conference. Thank you very much. Everyone keep safe. Thank you.
All right. Thanks to Elon Levy for today's briefing. Now, it's going to be interesting, and let's start with the main story of the day, and that is Prime Minister Netanyahu said for peace to actually happen, Hamas must be crushed, Gaza must be demilitarized, the Palestinians must be de-radicalized, okay? I think that what we're talking about here is three goals that are not realistic, okay? Can Hamas be crushed? Yes, that could happen. Is Gaza going to be demilitarized on the day the war ends, whenever that may be? We're hoping it's sooner as opposed to later. No, it's not. And part of the reason that the polls are so lopsided against, for Hamas and against Israel at the moment is because of the amount of fighting that's going on there. It's the same reason that Israelis are upset that there are, humanitarian food shipments are going into the Gaza Strip. When you're in the middle of war, both sides are very raw about what's going on. So the thought that you can demilitarize Gaza after 81 plus days of fighting is a totally unrealistic goal. It is a mid-range to long-term goal. Absolutely, it is. Okay, and that's that's part two of a perhaps three-step plan. First is to stop the fighting. Whenever Israel declares war, that the war is over. That the war obviously was started by Hamas on October 7th. All right, so when the war is over, then you begin the process of healing, and after that process goes through, and you begin the process of working together to make Gaza, rebuild it, and to rebuild the areas in Israel where people have been displaced and they've lost their homes. All of that leads to the demilitarization of Gaza. Okay, so that is not something that can happen the day after the war ends. Palestinians being de-radicalized, again, same situation. Once a war is over, it's a lot easier to de-radicalize people when you begin the process of saying, okay, here's what's going to happen, and you have a plan, and you explain what the plan is, and you begin the process of the plan. That's how you de-radicalize people. To come up with the concept that these three things must be accomplished is unrealistic. It's totally unrealistic, and it's, I'm not quite sure that the Prime Minister has, a concept of what's going to happen with regard to this. It's just my opinion, but I do believe, and I do believe that in talking with a number of people in Israel, that they're not convinced that the president understands what's going on. That's another topic for another day. But for right now, the Wall Street Journal article is troubling to Israelis because of this. Netanyahu outlined three prerequisites in the Wall Street Journal op-ed. he makes no mention of the hostages. Okay, now that cost him seriously. He is already being demonized by the hostage families for what's going on. Okay, they're upset because they feel that the intense bombing potentially has an opportunity to maybe kill their own hostages. Okay, so they're asking for, no one's asking for Israel to stop fighting Hamas. That's not the situation. They're asking for a slower, less aggressive stand, specifically on the bombing, because while they talk about getting rid of tunnels, hostages are in those tunnels, and more likely the hostages are in the tunnels when, in southern Israel, southern Gaza, I'm sorry, southern Gaza. The situation with southern Gaza is that's where likely most of the people who were abducted, the 240 abducted, on October 7th, is likely to be in those areas. So increased bombing is a problem. Now, what does that do to the IDF? It makes it very difficult for them to fight because they're going to have to do like the U.S. did in Fallujah, go block by block, street by street. That is not easy. And that's a very difficult war because what you're doing then is people in buildings, people, there's a number of places that you become very vulnerable. You need air support, and that's understood. But to what extent does, that extra bombing put in peril the potential of killing the hostages? Now, the fact that that the prime minister made absolutely no mention of releasing the hostages as a key point was beyond a mistake. I mean, perhaps he felt it was implied. Well, when you write an op-ed in a newspaper as respected as Wall Street Journal, read, on a worldwide basis, you need to be specific, and to leave that element out of it is absolutely, positively an omission that the prime minister should never have done. I mean, I think we can all agree on that one. The two-state solution repeats opposition to Palestinian role in the post-war Gaza. Okay, so Benjamin Netanyahu has never been a fan of the two-state solution. Let's take that off the board. That's not something he's going to do, and only a new prime minister is likely to begin the process of two-state solution. As we've said before, the two-state solution is probably the only solution that makes any sense. Okay, so Netanyahu's opposition to this two-state solution basically goes against his two of his criteria, which is demilitarizing and as well as de-radicalizing, Hamas in Gaza. I mean, that's if there's no carrot for them to do it, then why do it? And the carrot would be the beginning of a Palestinian state that would be, next to Israel. Israelis want peace. Palestinians want peace. You're not going to get there without a two-state solution. And that's why it's supported by both Israelis and Palestinians. So the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not a fan of that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to happen. It's got to happen for long-term peace in the Middle East. Now, as far as the Palestinian Authority role in ruling post-war Gaza, there was a question asked in the press conference having to do with the United States saying that the Palestinian Authority has to be in. The Palestinian Authority, that is not what the United States has said. The Palestinian Authority has been involved in negotiations as to who might be involved as ruling the Palestinians in Gaza after a war ends. They are among a group of people being talked about and talked to, of a coalition of people. That is not to say that the United States, have they had conversations about it? Yes. Have they said, uncategorically that the PA has to be involved? No, they have not. They're talking to everybody. They're talking to people in the region, specifically the UAE, Qatar, Egypt, and of course Saudi Arabia. Those are potential members of what might be the team of countries in the region who will help, along with the United States, probably France, Great Britain, help create what in essence is like a Marshall Plan for Gaza once the war is over. So, will the PA be involved? Perhaps, but to what extent, no one really knows at this point. And as I said before, it's very important to note that President Biden and the administration has never made that a specific request that happens. Have they spoken to them, as I said before? Yes. Will they be involved? Perhaps, but to what extent, we have no idea at this point in time. So that's I just want to clear that up. The U.S. is not totally on board with that concept. They're just talking at this point. Now, let's move on to what's going on with President Biden in the United States. Now, President Biden ordered strikes on Iranian groups in Iraq after 3 U.S. service members were wounded. Okay? Now, what President Biden said is the attacks come as the war in Israel, with Gaza continues to stoke tensions in the region. The Biden administration has backed Israel in the war, while militia groups across the region have backed by Iran, I should say, increased their military actions in response to a bombardment of Gaza. Now, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said numerous times that they will not put up with Iranians continuing to fire at as Israel, as well as some of their proxies who have been attacking ships in the Red Sea. So Secretary of Defense Austin, who has numerous times said that it won't be tolerated and it will be handled very quickly and very diligently by the U.S., reissued a statement yesterday saying that strikes are necessary and will be proportionate. He said they intend to disrupt, degrade capabilities of the Iranian-aligned militia groups in direct responsibility for those attacks. Now, that means, quite frankly, that the U.S. is ready to move forward and take out those firing bases and launching bases that Hezbollah has been using. So that is something that they're going to do. When they're going to do it, it's not something that you tell that you give people a heads up about. Here's what Austin also said. Let me be clear. The President and I will not hesitate to take necessary action to defend the United States, our troops, and our interests. There is no higher priority, Austin said in a statement that he issued yesterday. While we do not seek to escalate the conflict in the region, we are committed to fully prepared to take further necessary measures to protect our people and our facilities. Okay, so make no mistake about it. Secretary of Defense Austin, President Biden, Secretary Blinken are all ready to take on Iran and their proxies. And the more that Iran does, the more things are going to be quite interesting. and quite difficult for the Iranian proxies in the area, and quite frankly, very difficult for the Iranians. So that gives you an idea of what the headlines are today. And, we really do think that that there's going to be the Egyptian peace conversation, and their plans is something that certainly Israel, the United States, and others are taking a look at the moment. There may be a refinement of it. We talked about the other day in total. So we'll keep you posted on how that goes as well. But for right now, those are the headlines. Those are the issues that are at hand. And we hope that you pay attention to what we're talking about here. We will do another podcast tomorrow about the process and bring you up to speed. Obviously, we will let you know about stories that will be dropping that will be, delving deeper into this. That will be happening this week as well. All right, so we thank you very much for your time and your consideration, for being with us. We do ask a couple favors for you, okay? As the crawl goes through, it says subscribe, hit the bell, and like us. Feel free to comment, and we're going to answer them, okay? So, we know you're watching. Got a very good audience out there, very knowledgeable audience out there. So do us a favor, subscribe. What'll happen then, if you hit the bell, is that you'll know when these podcasts come out. Now, if something urgent happens, we'll be right there to talk you through it, tell you what's going on, and give you clips from Elon and Tal Heinrich, who are spokespeople for the Israeli government. Perhaps it might be something from Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. If he has a press conference detailing what's going on, you'll get a clip of that. Same thing with Lloyd Austin or President Biden. Okay, so whenever there's something that goes on with the war in Israel, we will let you know. And as I said before, I don't think there's any doubt that Israel is going to win the war. The matter is how and when, and then what happens afterwards. So those are the things we're focusing on, and we hope that we can keep you apprised as best we can. So to do that, follow us, subscribe, hit the bell, like us. Feel free to leave comments. Now, again, you don't have to agree with us. We welcome your comments, whether they agree or don't agree. We'll answer them as best we can. And more importantly, if you have questions you want us to ask, by all means, submit the questions. We will do our best to get you answers from the people who are involved. Okay, so that as well. Now, for those of you who are not watching us on YouTube or haven't had an opportunity to see the whole show, or because it's always there, you can always get it on demand. We also have a podcast, and it's the Politically Incorrect Podcast. It's available on Apple, Amazon, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, as well as iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Audible, and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so that takes care of business. We have been here on Tuesday, day 81, talking about what's going on in Israel, specifically, as we said before, as we highlight what's taking place today. A great deal of fallout for the Prime Minister's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal from the hostage families, who are upset that he didn't make that a priority in his Wall Street Journal post. And then, of course, President Biden and Secretary of Defense Austin's defense of the fact that there will be strikes on on Iran, for their attacks on Israel, because of the attacks on American soldiers who are defending in that area. Okay, so that's your recap for the day. We thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow, day 80 through. Be safe, everyone, and have a good holiday.